This morning we're going to be talking about life after life, which is now a general name given to a specific kind of phenomenon. And phenomenon are those people who have had a near-death experience. Now, what is that exactly? Well, in short, it's people who have had an accident or an infection or surgery and have found that they are at some point during that procedure beginning to go downhill. They are finally declared dead, go on through a series of events that lead them eventually back to the body, so that it is not a complete death, but it was a near-death experience, and that phenomenon has been now identified worldwide. Now, how did this all get started? Well, it gets started in general in this generation, or the one immediately preceding us, with a gal by the name of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. Dr. Ross wrote a story about death and dying, and it called attention to this phenomenon. She only had one or two examples in her first and opening book on this subject, but she was soon followed by someone named of Raymond Moody, Jr., MD, and Dr. Moody, during his years as a graduate student, as a medical student, began to hear more and more stories about people who had this experience, and they were similar experiences. They began to count them up and finally to write them down. Dr. Moody's book, published I think in the 1970s, was then the first worldwide bestseller on this subject, and probably remains so even today. Dr. Moody was succeeded by a variety of people. George Ritzie, MD, Melvin Morse, MD, Dr. Pim van Lommel, MD, and others. And they tell a similar kind of a story, and that's why they finally have taken this to the point where there are now many dozens of books and thousands of cases that have been reported. There was a philosopher named Schopenhauer, and Schopenhauer had something interesting to say about new ideas. He said every great new idea has at least three phases. In the first phase, it is generally ignored. And in the second phase, it is widely rejected. And in the third phase, it is accepted as having been self-evident all along. And that we are in one of those phases now with this particular idea. There are scientists, physicians, who still widely reject it. We're past the stage, I think, when people said, well, I'm not going to pay attention to that. It's now too late to do that. It's being paid attention to all over the world. But we're not yet quite at the phase where people say, oh, well, I know this must be true. We still need to reach some level of satisfaction or consensus on that point. Now, why am I doing this? Why are we doing this? Well, the people who do this out there, who listen to these things and who come back with this near-death experience, come back changed people. They have been, they say, in the presence of pure love and pure knowledge, and they aren't the same anymore. They say, I've learned something about the spiritual life, as they call it, and they are overwhelmed with the need to talk about it. Sometimes they can't because no one will listen to them. They're then discouraged, but that is in general what they come back with. And my personal ambition and reason for doing this is that you too might reflect on what pure knowledge and pure love means to someone who actually might have had that experience. So while we're going to go through a lot of these books first, we're going to end up also going through biblical references and also discover and look at one of the most remarkable and interesting new scientific theories that probably ought to be considered in this respect. Okay? Let me just read a little bit about the experience. This is the way it usually goes. A man is dying, and as he reaches the point of greatest physical distress, he hears himself pronounced dead by his doctor. He begins to hear an uncomfortable noise, a loud ringing or buzzing, and at the same time finds himself moving very rapidly through a long, dark tunnel. After this, he suddenly finds himself outside of his own physical body, but still in the immediate physical environment, and he sees his own body from a distance as though he is a spectator. He watches the resuscitation attempt, near-death experience, the resuscitation attempt, from his usual vantage point as in a state of emotional upheaval. After a while, he collects himself and becomes more accustomed to his odd condition. He notices that he still has a body, but one of a very different nature and with very different powers from the physical body he has left behind. Soon other things begin to happen. Others come to meet and to help him. He glimpses the spirits of relatives and friends who have already died, and a loving, warm spirit of a kind he has never encountered before, a being of light, appears before him. This being asks him a question non-verbally to make him evaluate his life and helps him along by showing him a panoramic, instantaneous playback of the major events of his life. At some point, he finds himself approaching some kind of a barrier or border, apparently representing the limit between earthly life and the next life. Yet he finds that he must go back to the earth, that the time for his death has not yet come. And at this point, he resists, for by now he is taken up with his experiences in the afterlife and does not want to return. He is overwhelmed by intense feelings of joy, love, and peace. Despite his attitude, though, he somehow reunites with his physical body and lives. Later, he tries to tell others, but he has difficulty in doing so. In the first place, he can find no earthly words adequate to describe these unearthly episodes. He also finds that others scoff, so he stops telling other people. Still, the experience affects his life profoundly, especially his views about death and its relationship to life. So that's an overall view in general about what happens. But what happens does not happen to everybody, nor does it happen in that sequence or that many instances. But there are probably now 20 or 25 kinds of characteristics which seem to happen overall. But some people only get through the first 1 or 2 or 3 episodes or instances. Others get through 1, 4, and 17, and so forth and so on. Well, as I go through them now, this is not to prove anything. And I have no personal experience in this area. I have no memory of a conscious or clairvoyancy, and so we get that out of the way too right away. This area now has thousands of cases, and each one of them are a little bit different, so try to keep that also in mind. There is, first of all, there's the phenomenon which I should refer to as ineffability. Simply the fact that these people come back and they're unable to express what they have seen. Inexpressibility might be another word that we use. But as long as we're using a word which talks about not being able to understand things, we might use a word which is also unknown to most people, right? Okay. And people say, you know, I can't quite tell you exactly what it was like because it was so different. It was so odd. It was so strange. It was so remarkable. And so they tell a story instead of what they mean to say. And I'm going to try my best to describe an ineffable situation. Here is everybody who took geometry knows what that is. That's the three-dimensional world in which we live now. Suppose, however, I ask you to locate, I want you to locate in this box 2:00 p.m. yesterday. Where will you locate 2 p.m. in a box of 3 dimensions? Is that here? No, it's a question which you don't expect, because what you expect to answer a question about is 3 dimensions, and it turns out that time might turn out to be a 4th dimension, or a 5th and a 6th, because after all, it is past, present, and future. Or perhaps it is not time at all, but is space really that we're measuring. And there's some scientific reasons to believe that that's true. But in any case, when you come back and they say, well, what happened to you? Well, things were happening simultaneously all over the world. Now, see, but how do you explain that in rational terms in this generation? Well, what's this? A flower. Okay, and I'm going to label it. What color is that flower? Huh? Well, that's the outside of it, but I haven't colored it yet. White. Okay, you think it's white. No, actually, it's spiritual color number 47-2. Now, why do I know that? No, I have no idea. I made that up, okay? Just to be absolutely clear about it. But the point of it is, the colors available in the spiritual world are so remarkable and unique and changing that they're unidentifiable. They're ineffable, if I can use another phrase. What do you think this is? Looks like a circle, right? No. This is a thought, because thoughts are things and have behind them a power to change at a distance things that they're running into. Okay? So that in fact it might have ears and it might not. Okay? It might be a beautiful little girl, or it could be a vicious animal in hell. And so that in a variety of ways, the experience that these people has is one that's ineffable and undescribable. Yeah.
Are these examples of attempts that folks have made, or are you just making
No,
stuff?
These are attempts that people have made, especially this one. The fact that thoughts are, yes, that they come back talking about this and about the difficulty of it. One frequent circumstance, for example, turns out to be when they are asked to review their lifetime. The lifetime review goes on so quickly and with such rapidity in general that everything seems to happen immediately and finally. And yet they're able to connect one episode with another, and when they're forced to say, how long did that change take? Because after all, you're talking about a circumstance in which the their whole life is being reviewed. How long does it take to review their life? I'm not so sure. It might have been a couple of seconds.
This is the,
Or it might have been 10,000 years.
this is the,
I've given this before, and almost half of the group knows someone or had someone who had this experience. And so the fact that I expect to hear more individual stories, and I'll tell you a few myself. What's the news? The news is, I'm sorry, Mr. Jones, but you're dead. And let me try to give you a particular example of that, of a story like that. Hearing the news. A young man who was thought dead following automobile accident said, I heard a woman who was there say, is he dead? And someone else said, yeah, he's dead. Reports of this kind accord quite well with what the doctors and others present remember. For example, one told me, and then there's more examples of that kind. It's a little bit of a shock emotionally to hear that you're dead. You would think that it is, except that there is something else almost immediately that follows it, and that is feelings of peace and quiet. Feelings of peace and quiet almost invariably follow that because they are not left to wonder and to worry about their condition. I shouldn't say inevitably, but that is nevertheless, or quite frequently. Another man recalls, and let me read that to you. I had just had a nice, great feeling of solitude and peace. It was beautiful, and I was at such peace in my mind. A man who died after wounds suffered in Vietnam says that as he was hit,